Hi everyone and welcome back to my kitchen. It's been a minute. It is a snowy, blustery day outside here in Southern Ontario. So I want to make something, we always say stick to your ribs food. I don't really know what that means because your stomach is nowhere near your ribs, but whatever, you know what I'm talking about, stick to your ribs food. So what we're making today is braised beef short ribs. I've only made short ribs once before, and that was with my friend Marg when she was living in Ottawa. Hi, Marg. And she is no longer living in Ottawa, but I saw these short ribs in the grocery store the other day, and I thought, oh, you know what? Maybe it's time for me to try making short ribs again. So here we go. What are short ribs? So short ribs are it's beef, and they can come with a bone or without a bone. These ones have a very, very small bit of bone on the side. I'll show you like a little close-up in a moment. They're quite well marbled. One of the things I find when you're looking for short ribs in the store is that sometimes seems to be way more fat than there is meat. So you kind of have to pick through a few different packages until you find the one that you want. This package only had 2 short ribs in it, which is fine because I'm just cooking for myself and I'll have some leftovers for another time. Most recipes will have you cook like 4 or 6 or 8 of these, you know, if you're serving for a large group, but I'm not. So I'm not sure what the actual, I have to look it up and I'll put it in the notes how many pounds these are. So there's quite a thin bone with a bit of meat and some fat on it. These are best cooked low and slow. That said, in order to cook them low and slow, you need to get a nice browning on them first. So I think I've talked about this before when we talked about, you know, browning meat, like steaks and roasts and things like that. The reason we brown meat is for flavor. It has nothing to do with locking in juices. That is a fallacy. That does not happen. What we want is to create a nice browning on the outside of the meat because that is where all the flavor comes from. It's called the Maillard reaction. I've written about it before. You can look it up to see what it means, but essentially it's sort of charring the proteins and the sugars that are in the meat and creating a nice caramelization on the outside, which is where all the flavor comes from. So in order to make this recipe, I'm going to show you what I have here, but most of the action is going to happen over there on the stove and I'll have to reposition my camera. But what have I got going ahead of time? So first of all, wine. I have an entire bottle of wine. This is a Cabernet Franc from Prince Edward County from Stanner's Vineyard. You want to use a bottle of red wine that is good enough to drink, but you don't want to break the bank. You're not using a $50 bottle of wine usually when you're making something like this, but you want something that's got a sufficient body to it, and you want something that is drinkable. So I actually I did sort of pour myself a little glass as well so that I can drink it. Cabernet Franc is great for something like this. Currently, it's on the stove reducing. So I have put it in a pot and I want to reduce it by about a half. So if a bottle is 750 mils, I want to get it down to about 500, 400, 300 mils, sort of somewhere in there. That just helps so that the sauce that we're making isn't going to be too liquidy. We won't have to cook it as long. The other thing we need for braising is broth. Traditionally, we use beef broth when we're making beef. I had mushroom broth, so hey, we're using mushroom broth. The next thing we need is our mirepoix. And the mirepoix in this case is your aromatic. So I've got roughly chopped onion and carrot. So look how big this piece of carrot is. So we're chopping these really finely. We want nice big chunks of vegetable. And then the other thing we have in here is a little bit, I had some celery left over. So that's your traditional mirepoix, just roughly chopped. That's where a lot of the flavor is going to come from. The other part of the aromatics is garlic. I have 3 really large cloves of garlic that are roughly chopped. I haven't mixed these in with the mirepoix because I'm going to put these in after because I don't want them to burn. So I always add the garlic a little bit later than I add the rest of the mirepoix. The other thing I have here are mushrooms. I don't know, there's like maybe 6 or 7, 8 mushrooms. What's that, about a cup and a half? Again, fairly roughly chopped, so they're not in really super fine pieces. They're, fairly chunky. The other thing we have is tomato paste. So this is, I probably won't use the whole thing. I might only use like half of it, but then you can keep your tomato paste, whatever you have left, put it onto a piece of plastic wrap and flatten it out and put the plastic wrap over, stick it in the freezer, and then you can use it at any time in the future, okay? If you are lucky enough to have a tube of tomato paste, that also works really well because then you can just squeeze out the amount that you need. I only need about 1.5 tablespoons or so. I also have some fresh herbs here. It's what I had in my fridge, some really kind of raggedy looking thyme and rosemary, but it's going in the pot and the flavor's still going to be there. It's not the freshest, but whatever. I also have some olive oil, and in here I have some flour for dredging. So it's flour mixed with salt and pepper, and I'm going to dredge the meat in the flour before I put it in the pot. Finally, the last thing I have is a disc that I've made out of parchment paper. There's a French term for this. I'm going to have to look it up. I want to say it's something like a cartouche, C-A-R-T-O-U-C-H-E. I could be wrong, so I'll have to fact check myself on that. But what it is that after I put all the liquid into the pot, and then I'm putting the lid on the pot so that it'll braise in the oven for a few hours, I want to put this right over the surface because I don't want too much of the liquid to evaporate, and this will prevent that liquid from evaporating. So that's I just measured it out, drew a circle with the lid of the pot and cut it out so that it will fit inside the pot. So there's the cartouche. And that is everything. I'm going to be serving this with polenta. I'm going to do like a creamy polenta, soft polenta, which is a little bit like it's a cornmeal pudding, so to speak, cornmeal porridge. It can be flavored any way you want. I'm going to leave it just plain. I'm just going to put a little bit of butter and salt and pepper in it. And I'll make that a little bit later as well, but I just want to show you here. I have my cornmeal pre-soaking. The ratio of cornmeal to water by volume is 1 to 5. So 1 part cornmeal to 5 parts water. You can make polenta with milk as well, or broth. You can make it with a mixture of the two. It's entirely up to you. I'm making it just plain with just water, and I'll show you that separately because that'll be something that I'll do closer to when the short ribs have finished braising and they're ready to serve. Polenta is not the kind of thing that holds. Once it's done, you kind of have to serve it right away. Otherwise, it starts to get really hard. There's nothing wrong with hard polenta. In fact, you can, any polenta that you have left over, you can spread it out, let it harden in the fridge, and then you can cut it into pieces and then you can fry it. And like whether you can pan fry it or deep fry it, and then you have like sort of polenta, like almost like a cracker or a bread or something like that. So that is an option, but we're not doing that today. So those are all my ingredients. I'm going to reposition my camera and get you set up over at my stove so that you can see what's going on over there. So my pot is preheating. Over here, can't see that well. I've got my short rib and I'm just dredging it here with flour on all sides. This is going to do 2 things. It helps with the browning because it makes sure that the meat is fully dry because meat won't brown if it's got any moisture on it. So you want to make sure that your meat is nice and dry, patting it dry, which I already did before. But I'm also dredging it in flour, which will help with a few things. It also helps to thicken the sauce a little bit later too. So there we go. So see, it's all dredged on all sides. Next, I'm going to put some olive oil in here. Don't need a ton. The other thing you might see over here on the far side, that's my red wine that's reducing. It may not get down to as low as I want it to be, but I don't want to burn it either. So there we go. So there's and this pot is the one that's going to go in the oven. So I'm going to put the lid on, and it's currently preheating. It's at 300. You want to cook it nice and low and slow. It's probably going to take about 3 hours or so for it to braise. Essentially, you want it to the point where the meat has essentially fallen off the bone. Also, it renders off all the fat, so you don't have big pieces or chunks of fat. All that fat will kind of melt out, leaving all that meat behind. All right, so I'm going to put these in now. Hopefully it doesn't create too much smoke. There we go. And I'm going to brown these on all sides because you want to get as much flavor as possible. See, you can see the browning that's happening here. The side with the bone is probably not going to brown because it's not going to make contact with the pan. So I'm not too worried about that side of the meat. But as you can see, I'm kind of browning all sides. I'm going to get as much browning as possible on here. The bones do get a little bit in the way, but that's okay. Okay. So next up, I'm going to remove this from the pan. Obviously, it's not cooked through, but it is browned on all sides. So I'm just going to remove those from the pan. And I'm now going to add my mirepoix. Apologies for the fan. It's just, otherwise the fire alarm will go off in here. I'm going to turn this down a little bit, down to medium now. Next up, the mushrooms. Now the garlic. Next up goes the probably half a can. If you're making a larger portion, you probably put the full can in, but I'm not. Now, when you add the tomato paste, we're trying to caramelize it a little bit. It'll help to, it'll bring out the sugars, and those sugars will caramelize, and that will bring out a lot of flavor as well. So even though tomato paste technically is cooked, you don't want to just sort of put it in. You always want to make sure you're putting it into a dry pan and to allow for that caramelization rather than adding it to a liquid, which doesn't really bring out the full flavor. So notice here how it's kind of starting to stick to the bottom of the pan, which is what I want. That caramelization is happening. The other thing I should have mentioned off the top is that you have to do this in a pot that is oven safe. So this is a Le Creuset braiser, and it can go in the oven. All right, so starting to see a little bit of caramelization. So the next thing I'm going to put in is my wine. Like I said, it's probably reduced. This is probably only reduced by about half. But there it goes in. Stir that around. So I've got this sort of on medium heat right now. And now I'm going to add the short ribs back in like that. Nestle them in. There's one. There's the other one. Okay. Now I'm going to add the mushroom broth. In terms of how much, I really just kind of want to bring it up to the level of the meat. Okay, so a bit of the top of the meat will kind of be sticking out. There we go. No, looks like it's almost a full carton, just shy of a full carton. Okay, so that's in there. I put the cartouche on top. Ooh, it's kind of curling up a little bit. Oh, I know what I forgot. Forgot to put my herbs in. There we go. There we go. Put that on top. That. And then the lid goes on, and now it's going to go into a 300 oven.